Hello again, and welcome to another slightly speeded up video. And this again is of boats. I do love drawing boats, and what I'm going to do here is talk to you a little bit more about fountain pens, because I'm using here a flex nib pen, which is a nib that has a very flexible end. It's made of very thin steel, so the more you press down, the more width you get from the actual ink. Now, because it's a flex pen and not the food pen, which I've used in previous videos, you can vary the line width. So if you start the line by just resting the weight of the pen on the paper and then press down and then come off again, you will get a line that obviously goes from thin to thick to thin. You can use that really effectively when you're drawing anything that's slightly organic shape, like say for example you were drawing like a nude or something, or doing life drawing. You can really use that line width variability to tell the story. But here I'm just using it as a normal fountain pen, and then I'll go back in and add in some supplemental wider lines. I mean, I also think it has a slightly different character because the nib flexes and it's quite a wet nib. It has a slightly different character and feel to some of the more fine nibbed fountain pens I use. If you're a fan of illustrators like sort of Quentin Blake and people like that who actually use a lot of dip pens and things, this is about as close as you can get to a dip pen, particularly like a manga sort of zebra G type nib without the mess. I mean, okay, so I'm head here. I have, as you can see, I've not used any pencil sketching. I've just gone straight in with the pen, and I am working from back to front, which is kind of weird because normally I would start with the foreground first and work my way back. But anyway, I really don't plan my drawings very well. I often think that if you sketch it out first, you can make sure you leave enough space around the subject to let it breathe, and that's definitely one of my failures. Is I tend to pick up a pen and I have a half an hour, I have an hour, and I just draw. And sometimes it works, sometimes it really doesn't. If you're aware of the mistakes you're making, but it doesn't bother you, then I don't see what the problem is. I mean, if somebody said, oh, well, it's a bit close to the bottom of the paper, I would obviously say, yes, it is. But I enjoyed it. I mean, that's the main thing. I don't, and I get a lot, certainly from a mental health point of view, from my art. Which is one of the things I really want to do with this channel more, is I want to encourage people to feel free to express themselves and enjoy it, and focus less and less on the actual, well, on their perception of the results. Because I think that's one of the interesting things. If you have a bad day at work, or a bad day in life, or you're just having a hard time of it, your perception of life changes. If you have a day where you wake up and you just feel great and the sun's shining, you could feel a lot more optimistic about things. And I think the way we choose to feel about our own art is actually a choice. But it's very, very hard sometimes to separate yourself from the self-critical voice and from the sort of optimistic thing of just looking at it and saying, oh, I really enjoyed that. Anyway, I'm going to be talking a lot more about my ideas and thoughts about how art and mental health walk very much hand in hand in later videos. But so yeah, let me know if that's something you'd be interested in on the comments. So what I've done here is I've gone back in and put in some thicker lines, as you can see with the flex nib fountain pen, and that's really made those separate elements of the drawing, i.e. the boats, sort of separate and come off the page a little bit. Now I want to come in and put some extra details in here, so I've got things like some rocks and the little harbour wall behind, and I'm using the back of the fountain pen and the edge of the fountain pen to do some suggestions of lines and textures. But I'm not, the back of the fountain pen gives a really thin line. I'm not actually overdoing it, because I want the harbour wall and the building behind and all those details to fade back into the sort of background of the image. And I might put a bit of colour on there. I might actually put a little bit of colour on there to tell the story, but I might not. But my thoughts with this painting from the off was really to use some really nice bright colours in the foreground. So I'm using my Daniel Smith paints here, and what I'm going to do is go in and put some pops of colour on all the elements here. I do like quite a bold, bright colour palette. realism is probably not that important in a sense. I quite like a sort of cartoony feel to the images. That's one of the reasons why I absolutely love children's illustrations. I've got 2 young kids, and one of the best things about reading them books, apart from the joy of sharing stories and all that, is just looking at so many wonderful children's illustrators and realising that it's actually what I prefer. I can see some beautiful crafted in pieces of art, oil paintings, landscape paintings, or portraits or whatever, but I like really poppy stuff. Okay, so what I've done here is I've put in some of the principal colours. I'm looking for, looking at the reference picture, I'm looking at the colour of the boats, the colour of the hulls, and below the waterline underneath. As you can see, I haven't done anything with the windows yet. Sometimes I will go in and just colour the windows black with a fountain pen. So here I am just doing some lines that work under the shadows, under the boats, but ensuring that they follow the perspective line, because we've got a sort of, towards the right hand side of the picture, where the paints are, would be the sort of perspective line disappearing down. So the shadows under the boats kind of follow that. So the one at the back is almost horizontal with the bottom of the page, and the shadow in the front is coming out at an angle under the boat. Boats are full of lovely little elements like the life rings on top, and colourful boxes and fenders, which are the sort of round balls that work like bumpers between the boats. And those little colour pops you can actually really, I've learnt over the years, you can just make up. I mean, if it's looking a bit flat at the back, put a fender in there, just draw it in. If the boat in the foreground needs a little bit more colour and a little bit more sort of pop, put some colourful boxes on the deck. You don't actually have to follow the reference drawing that you're using. Now I've put a little bit of detail in the background just to sort of give that some sense of shape, and then this fender in the foreground here is acting as a little bit of a leader to sort of bring your eye and make your eye go around the image a little bit, if that makes sense. So yeah, and you can see I've put a little bit of grey in the windows just to give them a little bit of shape. The final detail is, as per usual, is using my white gel pen to create a few highlights on the plastic components, and a few little dots to break up some of the big shapes, like sort of reflections. And we're probably not far off there. What I could do here is I could use some paint and sort of spatter it on and give a bit more texture, but I think that's fine as it is. So I hope you've enjoyed this little demo and my random thoughts about life, and if you have, like and subscribe, etc. Loads more to come, and yeah, thank you, and I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.